Welcome to the Black Doctors Talk podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Holmes, host for this episode and member of the Black Doctoral Network. Tonight, guys, I hope that you take your church hats off, you open up, you're ready to receive something new, some information. You're going to be transparent with yourself because I have a wonderful guest on here tonight. Now, I'm not saying this is specifically for the ladies, but ladies, you'll benefit from it. Guys, don't stop watching. You can learn some things too. My guest is none other than Dr. Ashley Towns. She is a sexuality educator, researcher, epidemiologist, postdoc research fellow, writer, advocate, and so much more. We have a lot to talk about and to share tonight, and I can't wait to get started. So thank you for joining me, Dr. Towns.
Thanks for having me.
So this is going to be good. I'm going to learn a whole lot tonight, and I can't wait for you to just dive right in. So let's just do that. Let's start by telling the viewers and the listeners, where does it all begin for you?
Wow. So, that's kind of a loaded question. Let's see. I'll start just quickly about me. Hi, everyone. From Cincinnati, Ohio. So, shout out to all the Midwestern folks. For me, I really got into health as a career, really in high school, if I can go back that far. And it was an unfortunate situation that got me into health or public health, finding out what that looked like. In high school, my sophomore year, my maternal mother, so my Nana, she actually passed away from complications of diabetes. And I was like 15 or 16. I didn't even know what diabetes was. And I definitely didn't know she had it or that someone could die from it. And so I started just trying to figure out what it was, Googling everything I could find and really trying to understand what is it and how do you prevent it? And is it passed down from her to my mom to me? What does that look like? And so that really kind of sparked my interest around health, prevention, chronic disease. And then I started learning about all these different diseases that Black people are like number one or number two for. And that really bothered me. I was so young, but it bothered me so much that I thought about it all the time. Like, what can I do? What can we do? Who can I talk to? And that's how I actually started school as in nursing school, because I figured I wanted to help people once they came to the hospital, to get them out of the hospital. And the second year of nursing school, you're doing clinicals. So you're in the hospital, you're on a floor. I was on a trauma floor. Not a good way to start a nursing career or a nursing rotation, because the trauma floor, if you're not familiar, it's the floor where people go after they've come in through a ambulance or a severe issue that they're having. So car accidents, falls, being helicoptered in, like anything really dramatic or traumatic, they end up on the trauma floor. And I was a sophomore in college, and I was learning all of these big medical words and trying to understand what this meant for me. What type of career do I want? And I really thought about it. And I went back to my Nana and I said, no, I want to prevent people from even getting to the hospital in the first place. I learned about prevention, and I switched my major to health promotion and education, which basically means you're learning about all the information so that you can tell someone else and they can make healthy decisions about their life. So that spans across healthy eating to exercise to preventing chronic disease, but it also is STI prevention, HIV prevention, alcohol and drug prevention, suicide prevention. It's all of these things. And I just I just fell into sexual health because at the time I was doing sex ed, programming on my campus as a peer educator. And everyone my age wanted to talk about sex and alcohol. And it just stuck. People didn't know about sexual health prevention. They didn't know about HIV prevention. They didn't know what syphilis was. They didn't know that some of these things can cause infertility later down the line. There's so much stigma or shame around talking about it, going to get tested, talking to partners, talking to doctors. And that was 15 years ago. And it's all that stigma and shame is still here. The guilt is still here. The structural and societal issues around sex are still here. And so I fell in love with wanting to change that. And it has brought me here to now as a researcher, addressing health equity, talking about racism, talking about discrimination in research, and having a voice, and being able to hopefully change the way our healthcare system views Black people, number one. And number two, how do we really address these issues so that Black people have longer, healthier lives?
Wow.
That's me in a nutshell.
You hit so many nails on the head right then that I don't know how many of those we're going to be able to tackle. Let's kind of go back. So I love your sweatshirt. So let's just start there, and then we'll kind of come back to the sex thing, because I think it's kind of where we're going to spend the rest of our time. So as an epidemiologist, what does that mean? What do you do? And why is that work important?
Yeah, so like I said, I was in a health promotion education program, graduated, went into a master's of public health program. And for anyone who has their MPH or is looking to get an MPH, there's these 4 or 5, I think there's 5. I'm sorry if I don't remember all of them, but there's these 5 different disciplines where there's biostatistics, health education, maybe community health, environmental health, I think, and epidemiology. Maybe policy is in there somewhere too. But basically, these are the different disciplines of public health. They're the different sort of spheres of public health where you can work. And epidemiology is one of them. And so in my master's program, I wasn't really interested in epidemiology. I was interested in education. And so I stayed in health education. I ended up working for a health department where I'm from and was doing disease investigations. So I was like an official disease investigator. So imagine sort of like a detective, going out and notifying people like, hey, I got your lab results. They got to the health department. And just so you know, certain STIs are, they are required to be reported to your state health department or your local health department. And there are people who, like me in the past, will go out and make sure people know their results and get treatment. And this is important because if you don't, you are contagious. And actually, right now, we're in a pandemic. These same type of people who are trained to do that work are doing contact tracing, which is what I did. And that will basically help you find who else was in contact with a positive person. Similar to with COVID, if someone is positive, they want to know who else was exposed so they can get tested immediately. The same thing happens with STDs, right? And so during that work, I really started to understand what an epidemiologist does. It is their job to kind of go backwards in time. So we have a disease or a virus or a bacteria, and we want to know where it came from. How long does it take to spread? How contagious is it? What populations are most impacted by it? Are there other social factors like race or education or poverty that are going to influence a population's disease risk? And so we basically look at all that data and we see what are the trends, in cities or states or nationally. And we basically look at a lot of data and we come up with recommendations from all of that work to say, this is really where you need to pocket and tackle prevention. Maybe these types of messages might help with certain groups. Maybe there needs to be a policy to help tackle this issue. Potentially, we might need to say our data is going to help clinicians really do their job in a healthcare setting. So our work really spans to a variety of audiences, but the basics is that our data is used to track diseases, outbreaks, whether they're small, like in a daycare, to something as large as a pandemic that's happening across the world. And EPIs can work in a variety of settings, from local to federal government, doing this type of work across diseases. So not just STDs.
So I have to ask you, I'm going to ask in a general sense, like you said, not just with STDs. It seems oftentimes that that messaging is not getting to the pores of the Black communities. I guess what I want to know is, what can we do differently to help people not so much receive the information, but respect it as valid and something they need to consider in terms of making lifestyle changes?
Oh, I could have a whole podcast just on that. But I think for me, I think a lot of times science and health communicators, so people who actually, it is their job to use their communication skills for a health landscape, or a health setting. I think a lot of times they don't work together. So my job is to look at data, come up, see what the results say, make suggestions or recommendations. And our work typically gets published in academic journals. So if you're not a student, you're not really looking at academic journals for a research paper. If you're a clinician or a nurse or something like that, you may need to look at those things to see what is new. Sometimes that data turns into trainings or presentations that people need to keep their license, and to stay active in their respective fields. But a lot of times that data doesn't get broken down into regular everyday messages. And that's a disconnect for sure. And then on top of that, different departments can be siloed to where the health educators and the EPIs or the data people, they don't actually work together, because their work, though it aligns, they have separate job duties. And because they don't sit down together and say, how can I make this data a health message or a tweet or a whatever that needs to be, a social media post, sometimes they just take the information and they put it out the best that they can without actually talking to the scientists who came up with it in the first place, or who is reporting it in the first place. And so I think we definitely need to bridge the gap between the two different disciplines within public health. Most communicators are not scientists. That's just the reality, and vice versa. Most scientists don't do a great job of communicating their information outside of a scientific, sense, very high level breakdown of the information. So that is why I think most people don't understand or respect science the way that they should, is because they don't understand it. Yeah. It's too complicated. And because it's not digestible for them, they don't really know how to respect something that they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. I just feel so compelled to help our community. And I don't want our response to always be to death. I want our community to respond to the data. They just have to know why the data is so important to them and how it can be easily translated to change behavior. And so I totally agree, the communication of it, like you said, so easily. If we just start tweeting these things, make TikToks about some of this data, it makes sense, it's real, it's relevant, people make connections and stuff like that. We're not at epidemiologist conferences, right? We're not taking those journals and taking them home. So I do think, and this is in all fields, I'm in education, we do the same thing. The great work is only presented at conferences and released in journals, and the people that need to hear it most, they don't go to those types of places and they don't hear that messaging. So I agree. So what are we going? We got to do something different about that, right?
Yeah. And I definitely respect the people who are in research who take the time to break down their data. I'm trying to do a better job with that. When a new paper is published, I try to take the high level points and break it down. I am a blog contributor for a sex wellness company. And so I try to pitch different blog ideas to say, can I just break down this article really quick into like 3 or 5 points that we can make a blog post and then make it into social media posts, but it doesn't happen all the time. And I try, but I'm not the best. I mean, I can communicate, but I'm not a graphic designer. I'm learning Canva, to try to figure out like what is eye-catching, what might be beneficial, trying to learn reels, so that it can actually be, reaching the people who
Yeah.
really need the information. So I think that's where we need to we have to learn new skills
Mhm.
to get the information out. And that's just something that we have to take on if we really want to have the impact that we say we want to have.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's kind of keep going down that lane. So epidemiologist, and then I know because you just talked about STDs and things of that nature, you kind of get into this whole role of sex, and then eventually it gets into sexuality. So let's ask this question first. What is the difference between sexuality, a sexuality educator, and a sexuality counselor?
Great question, because people think that I'm a counselor or a sex therapist all the time. And I respect the people who do that work, but I do not. So the main differences are the types of education that I receive. So this, if you just were to Google this, they all receive different types of education. There are counseling programs and there are health education programs. But it really boils down to what the person offers, right? So a sexuality educator is going to offer information that should be, and I say should be because not all educators do this, but it should be free from bias, free from stigma, free from discrimination, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of that. It should be free from that. Information presented that is going to help the person receiving the information make a healthy decision.
Mm.
A sexuality counselor or a therapist, they are trained, their discipline is more focused on helping people cope through various personal, traumatic types of scenarios, or I don't want to use issues, but things that they may be going through in life, and they help them cope through that. They may provide guidance. They may help them make a decision. They may be able to, depending on their licensure, may be able to offer various treatments. And some may even be able to prescribe medication for various things. And so in the sex world, that may be helping them understand what pleasure looks like for them, helping them break through a traumatic experience, whether that be sexual trauma from childhood or adulthood. That may be prescribing medication for someone who has a sex addiction. So it's various levels of information being presented, but the main difference is the ability to guide and treat versus an educator whose simple job, and I don't want to say simple, but main job is to provide information. We do not treat, we do not guide, or at least we're not supposed to. Maybe the guidance may be around, a prevention, a set of prevention tools that are available to you, or guidance on where to go for information, but not on the decision you should make. That is not the role of an educator, is to tell you what you should do. That's not really our role.
Gotcha. And so as an educator, as you would say, you're transferring information to the masses versus it being very specific and unique to a person.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Now, I do know that you do have a strong issue, or you do have an interest in issues related to Black women. So besides being a Black woman, which you are beautifully, talk about why you have a focus on Black women as it relates to sexuality and education, why that's so important to you.
Yeah, so aside from myself and my own things that I have encountered, things I've gone through, my own experiences with sexual health providers, I have friends, I have a mom, I have sisters, and peers, colleagues. And so I think anecdotally, women talk, right? And so when you hear the same frustrations that women are going through with seeking a healthcare professional, with navigating the healthcare system, with receiving or trying to have conversations with partners, regardless of the sex of their partner. These things are challenging for women to do. And of course, they're challenging for anyone to do. But just hearing those stories anecdotally, that honestly pushed me into research and to be a researcher, to be able to ask these questions and to be able to tackle these things using the scientific method. So, I wanted to know what Black women, what are their barriers? What are their real barriers? And that information was not well documented in the literature. Black women are not positively reflected, or haven't been. They are now, but they haven't been. There's, decades gaps of literature that highlights Black women in a positive aspect as it relates to their sexual lives. Everything has been STI focused, HIV focused, and there's nothing wrong with prevention, but there's also nothing wrong with talking about pleasure and the reason why people engage in sexual behaviors in the first place. And what does that look like for them, and giving them a voice to talk about it. And so for me, it was just wanting to be represented in research from a positive standpoint. And it wasn't really available at the time that I was starting this work. And so I wanted to give people who look like me a voice in research, and want them to be excited to contribute to research so that we can continue to engage Black people in research in the future, and not make them feel like they're a statistic or that they are being manipulated by scientists and researchers, because we've seen that in the past, with other large studies that were not conducted ethically. And so I just wanted to kind of help change that for us.
Well, I'm not going to let you tiptoe through some of the stuff you just said. So I'm going to help backtrack. Okay. So what you said is we don't want to see Black women only in research as it relates to prevention. We also want to see Black women in research as it relates to the positive side of it. And that is the pleasure of why we engage in sex to begin with. Now, I love what you said, and I'm gonna tell you why, because the idea in the conversation centered around sex is mainly a male-dominated conversation where men can be bold to talk about their sexuality, their pleasures, what they like, and their sexual history and past, right? That is normally something women talk about in close quarters over the phone, maybe now via text messages, DMs, may send a picture of something, things like that, but it's not like out there. And so here you are, this beautiful, bold Black woman saying, I want to talk about sexuality and why Black women in particular deserve to be pleasured. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. I love
Absolutely.
It. So let me ask you this question. How much of a person's identity in terms of their sexual identity, I would say, or their sexual, I don't know, their sexual being that they have tapped into plays into their self-esteem?
I'm going to say all of it. Because for one, we were born sexual beings. I used to teach human sexuality. And one of the lessons that I would walk through is, you talk about menstruation, and, you talk about how, a sperm fertilizes an egg and creates a baby and all of that. But what people don't often talk about is the fact that once a sex, so I don't use the word gender when talking about, a newborn or a fetus, but their sex based off of their anatomical parts. Once that starts to develop, there can be, evidence of sexual not activities, but sexual things happening. So, and what I mean by that is there have been sonograms of an erect penis of a fetus, vaginal lubrication of a fetus. And it's not that anything sexual is happening, it's a sexual function of the body. And so I think that, as far as our sexual identity or our self-esteem, I think what you're trying to hint at is our confidence, like our sexual confidence. And how is that impacted by our identity? And I think all of it, because whether you're a teenager or a adult, an older adult, what have you, you want to feel desirable to someone, because everyone wants to love a person and be loved. Some people want to love more than one person. Regardless, people want to love people and they want to be loved back, whether it's romantically, friendship, family, whatever. That is a basic human desire.
Mm-hmm.
And so a part of that love from the other person, a lot of times people think, well, what do I have to do? Or what do I have to look like? Or what do I have to present myself as to receive that love? And we go through all of these different things of what that needs to be. But the reality is that we desire to be loved. And so in order to have that desire, that attention, that love that we ultimately need to survive, who we are sexually it has an impact. What is our sexual identity? Who are we attracted to? How do we present ourselves? What is our gender identity? What is our sexual identity? And then that boils down to, physical, attraction and physical characteristics. Like all of these things matter, and we don't think about that. But you can look at little kids and start to see at what age do they start to care about their appearance? At what age do they not want mommy and daddy to hug them and kiss them in public, public display of affection, because they want to be desirable to whoever they think is attractive. And they don't want to be, a mama's boy or a daddy's boy or whatever that looks like. And so it starts very early. And we just need to name it and identify with it. But yeah, I think it involves every all of our self-esteem, all of our confidence is really boiled down to how we identify ourselves.
And I think one of the words you said earlier that was so important, I think that causes the disconnect, is this whole idea or this feeling of shame. And I think in the Black community, I think we get it from so many different spaces. I think the initial space happens in church. Yeah. You can't talk about sex. And I grew up in the South in the Baptist churches. You cannot talk about sex in church. They don't even talk about the sex that's in the Bible. They kind of skirt around it, but they were people. They were having sex in the Bible, okay?
Yeah.
So how do we remove what is being said and what's being projected on us? So like it can happen from the church, it can happen from the home. It's not something you talk about in your home. Maybe the environment that you work in or the place where you go to school is not accepted. I went to a Baptist undergrad program. It was one of those places, sex was just not part of the conversation that we really educated undergrads on. So how do you separate the world from who you are and how you identify? And this is despite gender, just sexuality. How do you do that?
Yeah, I struggled with that for a long time. Like who is Ashley versus who is Dr. Towns, right? And before I was even Dr. Towns, like who is Ashley at work and who is Ashley at home? And I think that you should never have to think about that. But because we have all of these societal pressures, it has forced us to think about our lives as disconnected and not think of ourselves as whole. And so I've really, thought about that. And, you mentioned about, not talk about sex in the church. And, that's a big thing for the Black church. And I can promise you, like, I grew up in church. I'm definitely, I still, I love the Lord. I love Jesus. Okay. And people used to question that, like, how do you, say that you're a Jesus follower, but you talk about sex every day, and you talk to people who are having sex and they're not married, and you talk to people who are in relationships with the same sex or the same gender. And, I have to remind people that sex is not just the physical act of having sex. Like, sex is such a broad topic. Sexual health, such a broad topic. Sexuality is a broad topic. And so we have to stop centering the physical act of sex and associating that with talking about sex. And I try to remind people all the time that talking about sex and sexual health has to do with boundaries. It has to do with consent. You can teach that, and you should teach that to your children. Like, what does consent look like when they are in school? Who can help them go to the bathroom? Who can see their genitals? Who can touch them? Who cannot? Those are things that are a part of a sexual health conversation that has nothing to do with sex, them actually having any type of sexual experience. But those things are important. So if we if we shy away from talking about anything related to sex, we're not teaching youth how to date in a healthy way. We're not teaching them how their body functions. They have no idea what their body is, what parts are called. We're not teaching youth how to be adults and make these types of decisions when they are old enough and when they deem themselves ready. They are ill-equipped. And I always think of it like, you would not put a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old behind the wheel, give them keys to a brand new car, and they have not done one driving lesson, been to driving school. Why would you allow people to become adults, even get married, and have never talked about sex? The good, the bad, the ugly, the pros, the cons, nothing. Or the only thing they've heard are very quick, knee-jerk reactions to something that they did in childhood or adolescence. And it was a no, don't do that. That's the only information they received. They're not going to be fully equipped adults to handle relationships, to handle conflict, to handle marriage, to handle anything related to a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship, because they didn't get any type of tools, equipment. You're not going to send a person to a job without them having any type of skills, right? It's the same concept. And people just don't look at it that way. They just see sex as this inherently bad thing, and God created it. So how can it be bad? Like, we just need to talk about it and give people the tools so that they can make decisions for themselves. And that's just what it boils down to.
Because I'm sure most people who are just ignorant to the work that you do, they probably think that you are promoting sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
you're like a concert promoter, but you're a sex promoter. Like, yep. Everybody, let's go do it. And you're like, no. And I like what you said, that it is not a conversation about an act. It's so much more. So how do we, and this is a tough question, but just think about an answer. How do we normalize sex? And I say that in the context that even in schools, many schools don't even have sex education. So they're not talking about it. Kids are talking about it to each other, probably giving misinformation. So how do we make it, this is my word when I talk about education, how do we make sex conversations part of pop culture?
Well, first of all, they already are, because we have the entertainment industry, we have TV and media that are doing a lot of the sex education for us. It's just not what I learned to educate people on through my program. So there are people who are not trained to be sexuality educators doing sex education.
Wow.
Some are doing a good job, some not so well. And by I say some are doing it well, there's several shows, movies, even songs that are promoting sexual health prevention, that are promoting pleasure, that are promoting autonomy. They're doing a good job. However, they are not trained to do this work. And it's unfortunate that people, we live in a society where, we have freedom of speech. People can say whatever, whenever, however, and it sort of takes away the authority or the
expertise.
The expertise, for sure, of a trained sexuality educator or a researcher. And so I think that we are, there are several of us Black sexuality educators, researchers who are doing the work, and we are doing our best to promote healthy messages. But really what needs to happen is we have to dismantle this patriarchy society that is based off of what someone says top down, and the outcome doesn't even impact them, right? So a lot of school administrators, superintendents who can control the curriculum are not women, right? They may not even be the sole educator in their home. And so they don't see the consequences of their rejection to providing sexuality education in a school. They don't even see that. Sometimes it's tied to funding. There's lots of funding that is, given to school districts to promote abstinence only. And that's a misfortune that, that funding decides the outcome of a student's ability to make healthy decisions. And a lot of schools don't even have a health class, let alone a sex ed class.
Or they skip that part of the curriculum.
Yeah, and when I used to teach human sexuality, a lot of the students in that state, their last time receiving any type of sex ed was like middle school, like 5th or 6th grade, and they were 19 and 20. And I was like, so what are you doing? Like, literally, what are you doing? And they thought they had all the answers, and they were horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And it was my job to inform them. And I love that they took the class, but it was an elective. It wasn't even required to graduate. It was an elective that people wanted to take, thinking it would be an easy A. Some thought it was fun to take. And I loved teaching it, but you're just scratching the surface with the number of people who attended that public institution to the number of students registered per semester. And so we just have to find a way to do more, and it's tough because we have to compete with so much misinformation that once it's out there and it's wrong, you have to do double, triple time to correct it.
Yeah, because you got to correct them what they know is not right.
Yeah.
It's a very tough job.
It's hard.
When you said that the people that are making decisions oftentimes are white men, that is so true. And I think what that does is connect to the stereotypes they have of the students that they serve, specifically if they serve, Black students, especially those in poverty. They're thinking, well, they don't need to be talking about sex at all because they're going to just go out there and have babies, right? And so they dismiss it, not seeing it as an opportunity to minimize births as teenagers and teen moms and things of that nature. So we'll have to do some more work. And so you are an educator. And I'm an educator. Maybe we can do some virtual stuff from conferences, I think, because the other thing I think about is, the students that sign up for the class, then you talked about the ones that didn't sign up for it. What about those kids who aren't even in college that could benefit from this information?
Yep.
So I think I see something maybe brewing here. We're both here in the ATL. So
yeah.
Maybe we can
it's needed.
Yeah, it's definitely needed. And I think when people think of Atlanta, they have no clue when you talk about kids in the city, there's a lot of poverty. There is not the lavish lifestyle, driving around in nice cars and high-rise buildings. There's so much more going on in a lot of the areas here in Atlanta, in other cities across America, and even in rural communities. So there's a need everywhere. Let's kind of go in another direction. Let's talk about you a little bit. Who has made the biggest impact on you in your life or in your career?
In my career, in my life, probably. So I'm going to talk about in my life, and then I'm going to talk about professionally, and they are like demographically complete opposites. So in my life, I would definitely say probably my dad. So a Black man. Professionally would be my advisor from my PhD program, a white woman, right? And together, the two of them, sort of, helped me become the person that I am today. And so I think that from my dad, he gave me a male perspective, a Black male's perspective about what this world will do to you, how it will, chew you up and spit you out, basically. And so he taught me about the importance of diversity and like going to schools that are going to give me diverse experiences. Even when I wanted Black only experiences, like I wanted to just be surrounded by people who look like me, who have, lived in my same neighborhood, who have experienced things so that we have something in common. And he forced me to challenge that way of thinking and to really dive into and go through the very hard obstacles and adversity at such, a young age, to really kind of know what I was getting myself into as an adult. And that was hard. But looking back, it was very helpful because it has allowed me to navigate the very systems set up to oppress me, because I learned ways around that, that a lot of people don't learn, and unfortunately get stuck in those same systems of oppression. Whereas I'm able to, at this state of my life, the stage of my life, be able to vocalize and fight against it. I've learned tools that you don't learn in school about how to fight against the very things that are meant to break me. And so I'm grateful for that. Did not like the process, still don't like the process, but very much appreciative of it. And then from a professional standpoint, I mentioned a white woman. So my advisor believed the very thing I believed, that we need more Black educators, we need more Black researchers. And she basically told me, what can I do to get you there? What can I do to help you close that gap that we see in our field, that there's not enough sexuality education being done by Black sexuality educators. They're done by white people. And we need more cultural competence, but that starts by having someone who looks like the community that they're serving, right? The same with research. There's a gap in research. We need a researcher who's going to stand up and fight for the community that they belong to. And she made sure that I had access to all the things I needed from the academics, atmosphere, whether it's mentors, conferences, helping me write abstracts, helping me develop presentations, really sharpening my skills so that I could get accepted to the conference in the first place, and then be able to present the research that I worked so hard on. Because doing the research is one thing, but being in front of the audience who needs to hear it is a completely different thing, and being ready and polished to deliver the message so that they can actually do the thing you're recommending, right? And so she really helped groom me for this field. And I'm incredibly grateful for her.
So with those two people in your life, you've done some great work. What would you say is your biggest accomplishment at this point in your life?
You know what? I thought that was going to be a tough question. It's actually pretty easy. I recently, and by recent, I mean last year, published a paper that was all Black women authors, with the exception of that advisor, because she was the principal investigator for the data. But we were able to, in my dissertation, do an oversample of a national survey to recruit additional Black women, men, and Black teens. And so with that data, there's only so much you can do with the dissertation. So since then, I've been able to have access to that same data and really pull out some of the things that I think matter. And one of those things was Black pleasure for Black women, orgasms for Black women, sexual experiences for Black women across ages. So from 18 to in the 90s of Black women. This type of data was not available. Most of the data available around Black women, as I mentioned, has been around, STIs and HIV. This type of data at the number of people, nearly 1,000 women, we did not have this type of information. Since then, there has been other sex studies to talk about pleasure and pain for Black women. And so ours was really the first study to really have that large number of Black women talking about something very sex positive and creating a foundation of sex positive data that I hope will end up in a sexuality textbook that people can teach from and say, yeah, we know that there's all these stereotypes of Black women, but this number of people of Black women are having enjoyable sex with their partners. And no, they're not hooking up like you think. Their partners are stable, significant others. And no, not all 18 to 25-year-olds are, having sex. I think it was like 1 in 5 women actually had never even done anything with a partner. So all kids who go to college or once they're 18 have had sex and are going to be teen moms. That's not true. We have data to support that. So that was, I think that has been the best thing I've done of all the things I've done so far. And we're working on additional papers related to that. So yeah, just having data to say we matter, we exist, we want pleasurable experiences that do not revolve around anyone but ourselves. That's powerful.
I love the confidence in that, but I also love the selfishness in that statement. That my body, my pleasure, my sexuality, it matters and it's mine. I
It
own it.
belongs to me.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe that's going to be the title of your next book. My sexuality belongs to me. I love it. Um, let's talk a little bit. We're wrapping up now. So let's talk a little bit about the Black Doctoral Network. I know that you are fairly new with us. So just share, like, what do you expect to get from this experience? We're so excited to have you be a part of us. It is great minds like yours that we relish in BDN. So just talk a little bit about your affiliation and what you hope to get from these relationships.
Yeah, so I've heard about the Black Doctoral Network actually since I was in school. I had heard about it, but at that time, you know, PhD world. For those of you who are in it, you have a million things on your plate, but I would encourage you to get involved early, so that you can connect with people who are either at the same stage as you or who maybe you want to be like them in some way and might find a mentor in some capacity. But for me personally, I think that this is a great opportunity to network with other educators. Even though my current work is not centered around education, it's centered around research. I'm significantly passionate about education, and so being able to partner with educators or just seeing where people are located, if they're in Atlanta or other places where they could benefit from the work that I do, and I could benefit from the work that they do. I think that's a huge thing that we need to do is, we got to stick together.
Yeah.
And even across disciplines, there's a lot of work that overlaps. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm really passionate about health equity. Health equity is across every single system that we have, from education to health to, the justice system. Health equity is needed everywhere, from children up to adulthood. And so really trying to see, what types of trainings or what types of opportunities might grow me professionally, but also how can I lend myself, like this podcast, how can I lend myself to help someone else? And so that's what I'm looking forward to, is just meeting other scholars who are passionate about our community just as much as me.
Awesome. Well, again, we are so happy to have you join us as a member of the Black Doctoral Network. And also, thank you for joining me today. This is not nearly as long as we need to have these conversations, but thank you for sharing what you did. It was so important. The information was great. And I really think you're going to have people who watch and listen to this really think about some things a little bit differently. Dr. Towns, would you please tell our viewers and listeners where they can go to learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I am doing my best to be more active on social media. So I do have Instagram. It is dr.ashleytowns, Towns, Townes. Don't leave out the E. And, I have a link tree that shows different articles I've written in a variety of magazines, podcasts that I've done. This will be linked as well. Blogs that I've written, links to all types of stuff, free, self-testing, all different things that I have available. You can just click the link in the bio on my Instagram. I do have a LinkedIn, so feel free to, chat with me on there as well. And it's just Ashley Towns. So yeah, those are the two platforms that I frequent.
So listen, guys, she's give you the information. We'll make sure we have that also in the description. Go and follow Dr. Towns right now. And while you're doing that, also go and follow the Black Doctoral Network on all of our social media channels as well. Thank you guys for joining us today for the Black Doctors Talk podcast. We hope you will join us again next time. But for now, be sure to like, share, subscribe. And as I always say, go and tell somebody about us. Tell your mama, your cousin, your friend, your pastor, your boyfriend, or your boo about the Black Doctoral Network. Until then, we'll see you guys next time. Be safe and be blessed.